I'm Ann Bjornson, Chief Human Resources Officer at V2X and member of the WashingtonExec HR Council. I'd like to welcome you to the Talent of the Core series, where we explore topics facing employers in the GovCon community relating to attracting, retaining, and developing talent. In today's episode, Reimagining Leadership Development and Readiness, we look to address the evolving landscape of leadership needs for organizations and what employers are doing to meet those needs. To discuss our topic today, I'd like to welcome our panelists, Janet Brewer, Chief People Officer at Arcfield, Deb Drake, Chief People Officer at Noblis, and Norm Iracheta, Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the Federal Segment of Maximus. Norm, let's start with you. How would you say the landscape and dialogue around leadership development has changed in recent years?
Yeah, so first, thank you, Joanne, for having me, and thank you for WashingtonExec for hosting, as well as my fellow panelists. So I love this question because it gets to the heart of what I think we've all seen as an evolving topic, leadership development. So I point to, in general, to a few things that I've observed as we've discussed leadership development in maybe the last several years. So for one, our business leaders have come to us in HR and asked very candidly if we're doing enough to develop our existing leaders, but also if we're doing enough to develop the next line of leadership. So in essence, are we doing a little bit more to focus on the bench strength, so to speak? So several years ago, I wasn't even asked by business executives how they can develop their group of leaders. Some just assumed they are in a leadership role, they arrived, they didn't need further development. Not the case. So the need for leadership development has certainly expanded to many layers of the organization. Two, I think how we consume the development as leaders has significantly shifted. So there is still the traditional cohort approach, of course. You bring a group of leaders, you put them through a program, send them to a seminar or two, and we've sort of checked the box. But we sort of know or have trended that roughly 70% of the skills that we learn as leaders is by doing the actual work. Or maybe another 25%, 20 to 25%, maybe it's through these formal approaches. And the last 10% is maybe through a formal or informal mentoring. Knowing the bulk of our learning is diving in and leading a team, leading a department is crucial. We start to see how business leaders or business executives are asking how they can deploy maybe micro learnings or maybe just-in-time development that can be applied in situations that are happening in real time. And then lastly, I believe because of our own schedules, they're getting more chaotic. Our calendars get filled up. Our time is probably our most precious commodity. I do think that we're seeing how traditional settings are shifting in order to accommodate leadership development. So take, for example, the concept and approach of the team meeting. Some business managers and leaders are now using that setting to establish leadership development. This can be done by taking maybe an hour-long meeting, breaking it up into two parts. So maybe the first 30 minutes is actual meeting topics, or maybe an agenda, the formal meeting. But then the next 30 minutes is to develop your team by either inviting a leadership expert or maybe having everyone take a leadership micro course that they otherwise would be just too busy to carve out time for. So it's just another way or a creative way to introduce leadership development. So those, I think, are some of the few areas that I've seen where leadership and that dialogue has changed and shifted. More requests from business executives, just the way we consume that development as leaders and how we deploy it as HR professionals and leaders to the business. And then how we're sort of doing that just in time or different, maybe traditional settings and deploying that leadership development. So those are, I would say, the three areas where I've seen sort of the dialogue and the landscape shift quite a bit.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Norm. It certainly feels like the pace and the direction has accelerated, right, in recent years. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, Deb, I turn to you. From your perspective, what new ideas or solutions have you implemented or considered or talked about, right, to meet your leadership development needs?
Yeah. So Norm, thank you, because I think that you're spot on, especially, related to that bench strength. And so similar to Norm, I'm going to go into three key areas I think that we're really trying to lean into. One is building our executive team dynamics. So every single one of our leaders has gone through a 360 review, the leadership circle. We did some discussion associated with that, or where some of our strengths lie, where we can develop together as a team, which I thought was really cool to have that discussion together. And then another area on that executive side is we're going through a heat experience, which is a stretch assignment for each one of us to look at that long-term dynamic of where we want to grow as executives, which has been, really cool to, do individually for ourselves as we work with our CEOs as well. And then the second one is leaning into succession planning. Norm, you talked a little bit about mentoring as an example of that. We use a 5-box model to really lean into looking at performance and potential with that. And one of the things that we've just recently done is created a leadership accelerator pilot, which is looking at and discussing best practices with individuals that want to develop into leadership. So it goes into some of the fundamentals, right, of what do you need to know as a government contractor in being a leader, a program manager, et cetera, but also the real leadership fundamentals of who you want to be, how you want to act as a leader, and how you can learn from each other associated with that. And then thirdly is the alignment with our vision with leadership, which I think is a really crucial one. We have a Vision 2030, so over several years growing and trying to double our size. And with that, again, looking at bench strength, it's making sure that our leaders are really well-versed in new technologies that are coming up. We do a speaker series where we'll have someone come in from a book, an author, and talk about a new technology capability. We'll have dialogue around it with our leaders. We do that as well with subjects like DEIA, so that way there's more awareness for our leaders as they grow and develop. We do some people manager essentials that I talked about. We're also doing more with the legal aspect and the regulatory. We're so highly regulated within government contracting, and so helping our leaders really understand the dynamics of that. And finally, with talking about our vision, Noblis has what we call our Noblis experience, which is service standards and behaviors that we all want to align to. And that's really helping all of us be consistent when we have new hires coming in, or if we have an M&A that we're doing. We all speak the same language about what our common purpose is, as well as what we expect of each other related to our behaviors every day. So those are examples of what we're leaning into for leadership development.
Great, thanks for sharing. And Deb, I love how you pointed out specific to our industry, right? I mean, it's already a robust catalog of leadership skills that a leader needs to know, but coupled with our industry, right? That's an additional challenge. So thanks for sharing. By the way, I love that heat experience. I might have to take that note on that one and call you on that. That sounds great. Janet, let's turn to you. Leadership development is both internal and external influences, right, that are impacting. What would you say are recent trends that are impacting your ability to meet changing business needs in the landscape today?
Absolutely. I'm happy to talk about that, and really appreciate Norm and Deb giving us all a ton of great ideas on how to address the various needs and different ways of tackling all of the development needs that we have across the organizations. There's obviously a lot of different interesting trends that we could discuss, but right now, 2 top priorities for leadership development and succession planning are flexibility and judgment. So Deloitte's Global Human Capital Trends Report found that over 80% of respondents rated leadership skills, such as decision-making and judgment, as urgent or important priorities for their organizations. So this isn't necessarily unique to our industry, but we are seeing across the board and also applies to us. Obviously, these skills, along with many other skills, are critical to being effective leaders. But right now, between COVID, the gig economy, the fact that being a social media influencer can actually be a viable career path at this point for people, what we're finding across the board is that people are just rejecting traditional boundaries and redefining different approaches to living and working and what that looks like. You then combine that with the speed of new technologies and AI changing how we work and how we live, how we plan our vacations. And this desire for flexibility and new rules just bleeds into everything. So as a leader, the old playbooks that you had to address kind of the old rules just aren't going to work anymore. So leaders are going to have, some examples of that, right? Leaders are going to have to decide how to embrace AI for their business. We've been working with that now, and how to apply judgment to questions that have never been asked before. So I know we're all struggling with that and working through it. And there's always going to be something next. Joanne, you mentioned that everything is accelerating. So there's going to be even more questions we haven't even thought to ask about that we're going to have to apply judgment and flexibility to. Our employees are asking for it, and the industry is going to ask for it. And so given that pace of change, the guidelines to support those decisions may become the new norm. Again, if we work on trying to create playbooks, my assessment would be that playbooks will be outdated by the time the ink is dry on those, right? So it may be that we need to define more guidelines for how we're going to make decisions and be able to think through those. Many of our companies, and especially in HR, we lead a lot by policies. So at companies and in HR, we'll frequently train managers to live and die by following this extensive library of policies. And it may be that that's not going to work anymore. We've all been in situations where there's a policy that just doesn't fit the need or a unique situation. And in a best case scenario, there's a lot of different hoops you have to jump through to get an exception. And we need to be able to change that. There's at least one large global company that's been running for years successfully without having formal policies. They're expecting their managers to be able to use their judgment. This can make a manager's job obviously a lot harder since there's no manual to follow. There's no yes or no, the rule says, sorry, I'd love to do it, but, and it is going to require then our leaders to be better at understanding how to apply judgment given a specific company's guidelines, where they're headed, and industry, and the new needs that are hitting them. It also is then we need to have that mindset embedded within the culture of the organization so that individual performance of the team members is also reflecting that flexibility and judgment as well. But if we're going to be moving into a boundaryless world, then we need a workforce that can also think creatively and also outside the proverbial box as well. And what I really appreciate is that it then ties back around to what Norm and Deb have talked about, which is great. Now we've talked about new trends and the importance of flexibility and judgment, and they've talked about different ways that we could then increase the skill set for our leaders going forward in those two particular areas.
Great, thanks for sharing, Janet. As you were talking, I couldn't help them. The endearing lesson we all learned through COVID, right? How to operate without a playbook, and judgment, flexibility and judgment is a forever trait I think that we will all need. So yeah, thanks for sharing. Very insightful. So pulling out the crystal ball now and looking at the next generation workforce, say 5 to 10 years from now, what one thing would you say will look different regarding development and readiness for our leaders? Norm, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is the $1 million question there. I think as we try to predict the future of the workforce, one thing I think leaders will need to sort of understand is how we're shifting really to an approach of skills-based organization and approach, right? How are we leading people versus a job? You're hired for a job. This is your role. You're kind of in this box. And now trying to lead a team or a group or department based on the skills that are needed for the task that you need to complete, the mission that you need to complete. So I think we'll just need to evolve as leaders to be able to sort of see that changing dynamic in how we're leading our very teams. Our teams are going to look very different. Our teams are going to be flexible, pliable. I may have a team today, and then tomorrow it's going to be a different team based on those skills that I need to deploy. And so how I lead those different teams, I will have to shift my leadership style, and leaders and businesses will have to shift their leadership style to be able to approach that thing that they're trying to accomplish for the organization, for the department, for their team. So I think that's something that we'll just have to continue to monitor and really continue to prepare ourselves. Some organizations are doing it. Some are on the cusp of getting into it. And so that skills-based organization and skills-based approach will be crucial and something we need to look out for.
Great. Deb, what about you?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Norm. And, I think just change management in general is something that we all have to be well versed in, because there's going to be risks that we have to take as new technologies, new capabilities come along. And those skills, the flexibility, that Janet talked about of being agile through that, I think are really critical. And then I think grace, we have to give all of ourselves a little grace along the way, right? We're learning together, and we're trying to maneuver through this, changing aspects, the new technologies, the shifts related to market, et cetera. We don't always know where it's going to lean, and that's okay. Like you said, Joanne, we learned a lot through COVID, and grace was certainly one of them, I think, as well. So that's what I would say.
Great. Jan, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, building a bit on this lack of boundaries, what's fabulous about that is it really expands where we can learn. So we're seeing a lot of that now, but I think it'll continue and accelerate even further in the future. The fact that people won't rely on traditional learning models. You will still attend some training, right? But the fact that you can learn from anywhere at any time where you least expect it and from around the world, and just having these connections that wouldn't have existed before, and that you can learn from so many different people that you wouldn't normally have an opportunity to learn from. I hope will create a lot of innovation and creativity for problem solving going forward.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's mind-boggling to think what 5 to 10 years from now might look like. Well, that concludes this episode of our Talent at the Core series, Reimagining Leadership Development and Readiness. I want to again thank each of our panelists for joining us today and taking the time to share their valuable insights. Thank you.